Our next section looks at communication challenges in business context. We're on page 188, and this looks at the different work-related values. Now, depending on the culture, do they value individualism versus collectivism? They associate this with individualism is United States, UK or Britain there, or Australian cultures and so on, or European culture. Collectivism looks at Africa, Asia, Central and South America. And depending on how you work in the workforce or your career, would you prefer to work completely on your own, or would you prefer to have help with other people and sort of have it a more of a relationship engaging experience? So because of this, there can be conflict or at least communication challenges of what's expected of you in the workplace. And we do have some examples there with Japanese organizations, as well as in the Rustenburg era and in Asia, how these can become quite difficult and blurry in terms of those lines of what's expected by young business workers. The second challenge is work and material gain. In individualistic culture, it's all about how hard work will pay off. And in other cultures, sometimes work can be a low priority and work should be a place of fun. Therefore, these different attitudes towards work, and we have all those examples on page 188 and 189, can get in the way of the attitude towards the work and cause some communication challenge. The attitude is based on the cultural group. Our next one is quality versus efficiency. They say that in the individualistic culture orientation, efficiency is getting the job done at a low cost. And some cultures value quality over just having that efficiency. They rather work hard towards a thing, but also just try to make sure that it is as creative as possible than just getting the job done. We have some research examples here and also stereotype examples of how this is portrayed in terms of equality versus efficiency. And it does depend on the culture and how they conform to the rules of that culture as well. Task versus relationship priority. This is talking about, is your priority over relationships or on task completion? In the individualistic orientation, it's all about accomplishing tasks. Not necessarily you have to have an office professional relationship or a friend or a colleague that you can communicate to. Whereas collectivistic orientations, all about relationships are essential for the business context and getting things done through your colleagues. Please look on page 190 to 191 of all those different examples there. The next section is language issues and how English is the dominant language mostly spoken and how this can be an issue. And if you read through this study example in Spain and France and India, it'll give you an example about how English can be a communication barrier, an issue between cultures. International business leaders therefore need to learn to deal with multiple language and understand about linguistic diversity when they're dealing with other languages. What they can do is they can implement the employment of translators or interpreters. And there are tips to work in the multilingual field, such as don't assume that everyone speaks English is one of the examples. Another example is to try to work with a multilingual workforce who speaks simple but not simple-minded English. A non-native speaker can better understand language that is spoken slowly, and so on. South Africans have to deal with a lot of language diversity. So it's very important that in the business context that you consider that not everyone is speaking English and to understand that there is multiple languages around the world. There's in fact 6,000 world languages. Next is communication styles. Now, depending on the culture, some cultures prefer more direct, which you're learning more about the verbal code. Remember that from our previous work, which is that you would ask the information from the appropriate person directly. So let's just say you need information from Susan. You'd go right up to her and say, I need this assignment on my desk. Do you have this information? And so and so. But some people don't prefer to use a direct communication style and prefer an indirect communication style, and they'd rather observe how other people would get that information and how they should receive that information. They also say that in South Africa that we tend to use a lot of indirect communication styles, and some people also use intermediaries in smooth business dealings because they're not comfortable using direct or indirect sometimes, and then they'll get a medium to help the communication business meeting. The next section we move on to is explicit in terms of low context and high context, which we've also covered before. Low context is explicitly putting out the verbal communication and relying less on the nonverbal, whereas high context is implying what you are saying through nonverbal communication using less verbal code there. This may result in a lot of intercultural conflict depending on who's implying the nonverbal message there and trying to get the communication across that way, then relying on the verbal code. And this can run into quite a lot of problems if someone is relying mostly on nonverbal or someone's being very direct and the culture doesn't really understand why you're being so direct. Next is honesty versus harmony. Now, this is the face work and the importance of saving face. In individualistic cultures, saving your own face and maintaining your own self-pride, reputation, credibility is very important. When collectivistic is achieving the honor, respect of everyone and the focus on yourself and the family group as well as the organization. They also go on to talking about how cultural variations and how truth is defined. If you turn to page 194, they talk about how deception is viewed and is viewed mostly unethical. For example, Japanese refiners signed a contract to buy sugar from Australia for 1,300 Rand and a ton, and when world prices dropped, they refused to pay. The Australians thought that a deal is a deal, and the Japanese, much more context sensitive, thought that the changed circumstances allowed for changes in agreement. The next section we move on to is business etiquette. This is talking about how there can be cultural variations in the business settings. Some cultures are not as formal as others, and it does depend on the greetings and also when you're leaving, how the cultures sort of take that. It's very important to be courteous and to take into account that not everyone is comfortable with that excessive familiarity, and they also give a very good example of the business card and how it symbolizes different things in different cultures. In the Japanese culture, it would be appropriate to receive their business card with both hands. And also, it's considered rude to put the card away immediately. So it's very important as well to take into account the different cultural variations when it comes to business etiquette. Our last part of the work is diversity, prejudice, and discrimination, which can also occur in the workplace. Because we have so many diversity in South African workplace, discrimination, prejudice can also occur. In our previous work, we've been focusing about assimilating strategies, which is to become part of the dominant culture. But at times this is not possible, and there's been times when the discrimination might happen and the dominant cultural group won't want you to become part of their culture. And the discrimination can happen based off physical appearance. We have some textbook examples here about Muslim women in Europe reportedly wearing the coverings on their head and all the things that happened there. Then they also talk about diversity training and affirmative action policies that can help counter discrimination in the workplace. There is advice on page 195 to 196 of how to help in terms of managing diversity and allowing equal employment opportunities as well in the workplace. We have completed Learning Unit 4. Please refer to your lesson plan and complete the VC Learn and additional activities. Remember to write down notes and inform your lecturer which sections you would like to discuss further. The textbook makes use of a lot of different examples that we can't necessarily get into the whole time through the video clip, but you're welcome to go through the textbook and point out the different examples there that you can add in further to your learning. I will see you in Learning Unit 5.